Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The American Southwest has long been a landscape of mystery and legend, but some stories transcend folklore. Some are recorded in official reports, marked unsolved, and left to haunt the pages of police archives. Tonight, we focus on one particular stretch of land, the Navajo Nation territory, spanning Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and a series of incidents that began in 1987, but whose echoes continue to this day. These are not legends passed down through generations, but documented encounters that left investigators with more questions than answers. The desert landscape holds secrets in its vastness, and sometimes those secrets reveal themselves in ways that defy explanation. We'll examine 8 separate incidents, all connected by geography and by the unsettling nature of what was witnessed and what was taken. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 1987 when 3 college students from Flagstaff set out for a weekend hiking trip in Canyon de Chelly. Michael Torres, Sarah Jenkins, and Daniel Kim were experienced outdoor enthusiasts, all members of the university's hiking club. They had informed friends and family of their itinerary, which included exploring the White House Ruin Trail and camping overnight near the canyon floor. None of them would return. The official search began 3 days later when they failed to check in as planned. What the search party discovered would launch one of the most perplexing investigations in Navajo Nation history. The canyon walls rose dramatically around the small campsite, casting long shadows in the afternoon light. The tents stood exactly as they had been set up, with sleeping bags unrolled and personal items scattered about. A half-eaten meal sat cold in a pan over the extinguished fire pit. What was missing were the 3 hikers, their backpacks, and 2 of their 3 cameras. The remaining camera contained 23 photographs, the last of which showed the campsite at dusk, with a strange tall silhouette standing between 2 tents, barely visible against the deepening shadows of the canyon wall. Local Navajo searchers spoke quietly among themselves about the figure in the photograph. One elder, Thomas Begay, who assisted in the search, would later tell investigators, "That shape is not natural, not man, not animal. Something else walks these canyons when the sun goes down." The official report, filed by Ranger Samuel Wilson with the Navajo Nation Parks Department, noted unusual footprints near the campsite, elongated impressions in the soft earth that did not match any known animal or human shoe print. The spacing between prints measured approximately 7 feet, suggesting an impossibly long stride. The search continued for 11 days, expanding to cover nearly 50 square miles of rugged canyon terrain. Helicopters flew overhead, while ground teams combed every accessible area. The only additional evidence found was a single hiking boot belonging to Sarah Jenkins, discovered 20 miles from the campsite near the canyon rim. It was filled with small, smooth stones of a type not native to the area. No other signs of the 3 students were ever discovered. The case remains open with the Navajo Nation Police Department, file number 87-1042. The families of the missing students continue to hold out hope, though 35 years have passed. Annual memorials are held at the canyon rim, and a small plaque bears their names. Local Navajo elders caution visitors about hiking alone in the canyon, particularly around dusk, when, as they say, the veil between worlds grows thin. The canyon continues to draw tourists and hikers, most unaware of the 1987 incident, or the unsettling photograph that remains the only clue to what happened to 3 college students who ventured into its depths. No trace was ever found. Hundreds of miles away in Window Rock, Arizona, a radio station operator was about to document something that would trouble him for decades. KNIA-FM, the Navajo Nation's primary radio station, typically operated from 6 a.m. to midnight. On November 3, 1987, just 2 weeks after the disappearance of the hikers, something interrupted their broadcast signal. Station manager Robert Atene was preparing to sign off for the night when his console lit up with an incoming transmission on their emergency frequency, a frequency reserved for official communications only. The transmission began at 11:47 p.m. according to the station's log. What Atene heard was not a distress call or official communication, but a series of sounds that defied explanation. A low rhythmic humming underlay what sounded like chanting in a language that did not match any known tribal dialect. Periodically, the humming would be pierced by high-pitched whistles that seemed to move across the frequency spectrum in unnatural patterns. Atene recorded 3 minutes and 42 seconds before the transmission abruptly cut off. He immediately contacted Navajo Nation Police, who dispatched officers to the station. Officer Marie Yazzie arrived at 12:15 a.m. and listened to the recording. Her official report noted that the transmission contains vocalizations that do not correspond to any known language, human or animal. The frequency patterns suggest a source moving at impossible speeds across the transmission area. Attempts to triangulate the source of the signal proved unsuccessful, with readings indicating multiple simultaneous points of origin across a 70-mile radius. The following day, Atene played the recording for several Navajo elders, including medicine man Frank Morgan. Morgan's reaction was immediate and unsettling. After listening for less than a minute, he demanded the recording be stopped. "That is the sound of the skinwalkers," he told Atene, his voice uncharacteristically strained. "But not like the stories we tell children. Something older. Something that doesn't belong here." Morgan refused to elaborate further, leaving the station visibly shaken. Atene filed an incident report with the Federal Communications Commission, which launched an investigation that concluded with no explanation for the transmission's origin or nature. In the weeks that followed, several residents of the Window Rock area reported strange phenomena. 2 families on the outskirts of town reported hearing the same rhythmic humming outside their homes late at night. A rancher 20 miles east discovered several of his goats dead, arranged in a precise circular pattern with no visible wounds or signs of predation. Most disturbingly, 3 separate households reported finding small piles of smooth stones similar to those found in Sarah Jenkins's boot, arranged in triangular patterns on their doorsteps. The FCC file on the incident remains open but inactive, designated case number 87-3B47. Atene kept a copy of the recording until his death in 2005, after which it was donated to the Navajo Nation Museum, where it remains in restricted archives. Visitors to the area continue to report occasional electronic interference on car radios and cell phones, particularly along Highway 264 between Window Rock and the Arizona-New Mexico border. The midnight broadcast of November 3, 1987, has never been explained, nor has it been repeated. The silence that followed has been perhaps more unsettling than the transmission itself. In the vast expanse of Monument Valley, where sandstone buttes rise dramatically from the desert floor, a park ranger was about to have an encounter that would challenge everything he believed about the natural world. Joseph Chi, a 20-year veteran of the Navajo Nation Parks Department, had taken the night shift at the visitor center on November 17, 1987. The center closed at 5 p.m., leaving Chi alone in the isolated building until his replacement arrived at 7 a.m. the following day. What he witnessed during those 14 hours would become one of the most carefully documented yet inexplicable incidents in the park's history. The evening began like any other autumn night in the high desert. Chi completed his rounds, checking the perimeter and securing all entrances. By 9 p.m., he had settled in the main office with paperwork and a thermos of coffee. The first anomaly occurred at 10:32 p.m., when the motion sensors at the west entrance activated, though no vehicle was visible on the security monitors. Chi noted the activation in his log and conducted a visual inspection with a flashlight, finding nothing unusual. The sensors activated again at 11:17 p.m., this time at the south entrance. Again, nothing was visible. Around 1:45 a.m., Chi stepped outside for a cigarette break. The night was exceptionally clear, with the Milky Way visible in its entirety across the sky. As he stood there, he noticed what appeared to be starlight reflecting off something near the base of the West Mitten Butte. Through binoculars, he could make out a tall, slender figure that seemed to be moving slowly along the base of the formation. Chi estimated its height at nearly 9 feet, with an unnatural thinness that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. He watched for approximately 5 minutes before the figure simply vanished, not by moving out of sight, but as if it had ceased to exist. Chi returned inside, unsettled, but rationalizing that distance and fatigue might be playing tricks on his eyes. At 3:22 a.m., the power suddenly went out, plunging the visitor center into darkness. The backup generator failed to engage, a situation that had never occurred before. Chi retrieved his flashlight and emergency radio to report the outage. As he attempted to contact dispatch, he heard what he later described as whispering directly into my ear, despite being alone in the room. The whispering was in Navajo, but a dialect so archaic that Chi, who was fluent in the language, could only catch occasional words. Fearing a potential break-in, Chi secured himself in the reinforced storage room with his service weapon. For the next 3 hours, he reported hearing intermittent movement throughout the building, footsteps that moved too quickly to be human, accompanied by occasional tapping sounds on the metal door of the storage room. At 6:28 a.m., the power suddenly returned and all sounds ceased. When Chi emerged at 7 a.m. to meet his replacement, he discovered that every door in the visitor center stood open, including the main entrance, which had been bolted from the inside. The subsequent investigation by park authorities and Navajo Nation police revealed no signs of forced entry. Security footage from the previous evening showed nothing unusual until 1:45 a.m., when the cameras experienced simultaneous technical failure. When they came back online at 6:28 a.m., the doors were already open. Chi submitted a detailed report and took a leave of absence, never again taking a night shift. He retired 2 years later, moving to Phoenix, where he rarely spoke of the incident except to say, "Whatever walks those buttes at night, it's not from our world. It's not from any world I know." The case file remains open with the Navajo Nation Parks Department designated Incident Report 87VM02. Visitors to Monument Valley continue to report occasional sightings of tall, thin figures near the buttes, particularly during the hours between midnight and dawn. Park rangers are instructed not to investigate these reports alone, and several have requested transfers to other parks following encounters they refused to describe in detail. The desert landscape holds its secrets well, and Monument Valley continues to guard whatever walks among its formations when the sun goes down. No explanation has ever been offered for what Joseph Chi experienced that November night. In the small community of Kayenta, Arizona, the Mitchell family was preparing for a weekend camping trip to the nearby Lukachukai Mountains. Thomas Mitchell, his wife Laura, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Emily and 9-year-old Jacob, were well known in the community. Thomas worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, while Laura served as a nurse at the Kayenta Health Center. On the morning of December 5, 1987, they loaded their camping gear into their Ford Bronco and set out, telling neighbors they planned to return Sunday evening. They never came back. The search began Monday morning when Thomas failed to report for work and the children didn't show up for school. Initial efforts focused on the Lukachukai Mountains, where the family was believed to be camping. Search teams discovered their campsite near Canyon Creek on Tuesday afternoon. The scene was eerily familiar to those who had participated in the search for the missing hikers 2 months earlier. The tents stood undisturbed, personal items lay scattered about, and a half-prepared meal sat untouched on a portable stove. The family's Bronco was parked nearby, unlocked, and with the keys in the ignition. What was missing were the Mitchells themselves, their cell phones, wallets, and Laura's medical bag. Among the personal items left behind was Laura's journal, which provided investigators with a chilling account of their final days. The last entry, dated December 6th, read, "Something is watching us from the ridgeline. Thomas saw it first. A tall figure that doesn't move like a person. The children are frightened, and I am too. It seems to know we're here. It hasn't come closer, but it's always there, just at the edge of the trees. Thomas wants to leave in the morning, but I'm not sure we should wait that long. The entry ended abruptly, as if Laura had been interrupted while writing. Search teams expanded their efforts, covering nearly 200 square miles of rugged terrain. On the 5th day of the search, a team discovered Jacob's backpack hanging from a tree branch approximately 3 miles from the campsite. Inside was a collection of smooth stones arranged in a specific pattern and a single page torn from a coloring book on which the word "run" was written in crayon. No other signs of the family were found during the extensive search, which continued for 3 weeks before being scaled back to a limited investigation. The investigation took a disturbing turn when a Navajo elder participating in the search, John Holliday, identified symbols carved into several trees near where the backpack was found. "These are warnings," he explained to investigators. "Old warnings. They tell of something that comes with the cold weather, something that takes people. My grandfather told me stories about these symbols, but I never thought I'd see them myself." Holliday refused to elaborate further, stating only that some things are better left unspoken, especially if speaking might draw their attention. The case of the missing Mitchell family remains the most troubling unsolved disappearance in Navajo Nation history. The FBI was brought in to assist, but found no evidence of foul play, abduction, or accident. No ransom demands were ever made, and the family's bank accounts remained untouched. In the years since their disappearance, several other families in the region have reported seeing tall, thin figures near their homes at dusk, though none have experienced anything as terrifying as whatever befell the Mitchells. The Navajo Nation Police Department keeps the case file active, designated 87-12005. Each year on the anniversary of their disappearance, a memorial service is held at the elementary school where Thomas taught. The campsite in the Lukachukai Mountains has never been used again, marked now only by a small plaque bearing the family's names. The journal entry, preserved as evidence, serves as a haunting reminder of whatever watched from the ridgeline that December weekend. No trace of the Mitchell family has ever been found. While the search for the Mitchell family continued, a Navajo Nation police officer was about to have an encounter that would challenge his understanding of reality. Officer Albert Begay had been with the force for 7 years and was known for his no-nonsense approach to law enforcement. On the night of December 15, 1987, Begay was patrolling Highway 191 north of Chinle when he received a call about a possible break-in at a remote trading post. What he discovered upon arrival would become one of the most bizarre police reports in the department's history. The trading post, owned by the Yazzie family, had been closed for 3 days while the owners attended a wedding in Phoenix. When neighbors reported seeing lights inside the building late at night, Begay was dispatched to investigate. He arrived at 11:42 p.m. and immediately noticed that the front door stood slightly ajar. Drawing his weapon, Begay entered the building and found the interior in disarray. Shelves had been cleared of merchandise, which now lay scattered across the floor. What was most unusual was the arrangement. Items were grouped by color in precise patterns that seemed almost ceremonial. As Begay moved through the building, he heard a sound from the storage room at the back. The sound was rhythmic, like stones being tapped together in a deliberate pattern. When he opened the storage room door, he found a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A tall, thin figure stood with its back to him, arranging various items from the store on the floor in a complex pattern. The figure appeared to be nearly 8 feet tall, with limbs that seemed too long for its torso. It wore what appeared to be traditional Navajo clothing, but the patterns and colors were unlike anything Begay had ever seen. When Begay announced his presence, the figure turned slowly. What he saw was not a face, but something that appeared to be a smooth, featureless surface that reflected the room in a distorted manner. The figure raised one long arm, pointing directly at Begay, and then simply vanished, not by running or moving away, but by disappearing as if it had never been there. Begay stood frozen for several moments before backing out of the room and calling for backup. When other officers arrived approximately 20 minutes later, they found Begay sitting in his patrol car, visibly shaken. The storage room was empty, though the items on the floor remained arranged in the same pattern Begay had witnessed. The official report, filed the next day, described the incident in careful detail, though Begay's supervisors initially questioned his account. That changed when they examined the security footage from the trading post's camera system, which showed a tall, distorted figure moving through the store, though the image quality was poor and the figure's features were indistinguishable. Begay was placed on administrative leave and underwent psychological evaluation, which found him to be stable and credible. He returned to duty 3 weeks later, but requested a transfer to a different district. In a private interview years after his retirement, Begay stated, "I know what I saw that night, and I know it wasn't human. The way it moved, the way it just disappeared, that's not possible. But I saw it. The old stories my grandfather used to tell about the skinwalkers and other things that walk the night at times. I never believed them until that night. Now I know there are things in this world that we're not meant to understand." The trading post never fully recovered from the incident. The Yazzie family sold it the following year, and it has changed hands several times since. Each owner has reported unusual occurrences, items moving on their own, strange sounds at night, and occasional sightings of a tall figure on the property. The most recent owners installed a state-of-the-art security system, which continues to record unexplained anomalies to this day. The police report remains in the Navajo Nation Police Archives, designated Case File 87 TP-191, a testament to one officer's impossible encounter. No explanation has ever been offered for what Officer Begay witnessed that December night. Dr. Eleanor Reed had been leading archaeological expeditions in the Southwest for 15 years, but nothing in her experience prepared her for what she would encounter in the Chuska Mountains in January 1988. Reed, a distinguished professor at the University of New Mexico, had built her career on challenging conventional timelines of human settlement in North America. Her 1979 discovery of pottery fragments near Mesa Verde that predated established ancestral Puebloan chronologies by nearly a millennium had initially been met with skepticism, but eventually gained acceptance after rigorous peer review. By 1988, she was considered one of the foremost experts on early cultures of the American Southwest, with numerous publications and a reputation for meticulous fieldwork. The Chuska Mountains expedition was meant to be the capstone of her career, a site she believed would finally provide conclusive evidence for her theories about earlier, more advanced civilizations in the region. Reed, a professor at the University of New Mexico, had received funding from the National Science Foundation to excavate a newly discovered ancestral Puebloan site that appeared to predate any known settlement in the region. The site had been identified by aerial photography during a routine geological survey, which revealed unusual soil discolorations and geometric patterns not visible from ground level. What made the discovery particularly exciting was that preliminary carbon dating of surface samples suggested an origin point of approximately 3000 BCE, nearly 2,000 years before the earliest known ancestral Puebloan settlements. What she and her team would uncover would challenge not just the timeline of human settlement in the area, but their understanding of what might have coexisted with those ancient inhabitants. The expedition consisted of Reed, 3 graduate students, and 2 local Navajo guides hired from the nearby community of Nashiti. The graduate students, Mark Harrison, specializing in ceramic analysis, Sarah Jenkins, an expert in architectural reconstruction, and Daniel Kim, whose focus was ancient tool technologies, had all worked with Reed on previous excavations and were chosen specifically for their expertise and field experience. The Navajo guides, Thomas Yazzie and his granddaughter Marie, were recommended by the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Office. Thomas, in his late 60s, had spent his youth herding sheep in the Chuska Mountains and knew the terrain intimately, while Marie, a college student studying anthropology, served as both guide and cultural liaison. From the beginning, Thomas seemed uneasy about the expedition, frequently muttering in Navajo to his granddaughter when he thought the others weren't listening. They established a base camp on January 10, 1988, in a small valley surrounded by ponderosa pines and sandstone formations. The location provided some protection from the harsh winter winds that swept across the higher elevations, but still offered relatively easy access to the excavation site less than a mile away. The camp consisted of 3 large tents for sleeping, a mess tent, and a work tent where preliminary artifact analysis could be conducted. That evening, as they sat around a propane heater in the mess tent, Thomas shared some of the local history of the area, speaking through Marie as translator. "This place has many stories," he explained. "Some say it's where the world above touches the world below. Old ones walked here, but not like the people whose homes we dig up. Different ones." Reed listened politely, but mentally filed the comments as local folklore, something interesting for her final report but not scientifically relevant. They began preliminary excavations the following day, establishing a grid system and carefully removing the top layers of soil. Almost immediately, they discovered artifacts that didn't fit the established chronology of the region. The first significant find was a pottery shard with intricate geometric patterns unlike any known ancestral Puebloan designs. Mark Harrison, the ceramics expert, was immediately puzzled by the piece. "The clay composition is consistent with local materials," he noted, "but the firing technique appears more advanced than what we'd expect from this period. And these symbols, I've never seen anything like them." Throughout the day, they uncovered more pottery fragments, all with the same unfamiliar symbols, as well as tools made from meteoric iron, a material not known to have been used by ancient peoples in North America. The architectural features they uncovered suggested a level of sophistication not previously associated with early Puebloan cultures. Rather than the simple pit houses expected from this time period, they found evidence of carefully planned stone foundations with precise astronomical alignments. "These foundations are cut with a precision we'd expect from Roman engineers, not ancient North Americans," Sarah Jenkins noted, as she carefully measured the angles of what appeared to be cornerstones. "The orientation suggests they were tracking celestial bodies with an accuracy that shouldn't have been possible without sophisticated instruments." Most puzzling were a series of petroglyphs depicting tall, thin figures with elongated limbs, always shown standing apart from human figures. The carvings were remarkably well preserved, suggesting they had been protected from the elements for centuries, possibly intentionally. The first unusual incident occurred on the 3rd night of the excavation. The team had retired to their tents around 9 p.m., exhausted from a long day of careful excavation and documentation. One of the graduate students, Mark Harrison, woke to find all the tents standing open, despite having been securely zipped closed. The temperature had dropped significantly during the night, and the cold air had filled each tent, waking everyone. "At first, I thought the wind must have somehow blown open the zippers," Mark later wrote in his field notes. "But there was no wind that night. The air was completely still, and all 6 tent flaps were open, not just mine. That's when I started to feel uneasy." More disturbingly, several of the artifacts they had excavated the previous day had been arranged in a precise pattern in the center of the campsite. Reed documented the incident in her field notes, attributing it to a prank or wildlife, though she privately admitted that the arrangement seemed deliberate and almost ceremonial. The artifacts, primarily pottery fragments and a few stone tools, were placed in a circular pattern with specific pieces positioned at what appeared to be the cardinal directions. "It's possible someone from the local community is playing tricks on us," Reed suggested at breakfast the next morning, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or perhaps some animal was attracted to the residues on the pottery." Thomas Yazzie, the Navajo guide, simply shook his head when asked his opinion. "Animals don't arrange things like this," he said through Marie, "and people from the community wouldn't come here. They know this place is not for visitors after dark." Despite the unsettling nature of the incident, the team continued their work, though with a heightened sense of awareness. 2 nights later, the team was awakened by a strange whistling sound that seemed to move around the perimeter of their camp. The sound was unlike anything any of them had heard, not quite human, not quite animal, with a tonal quality that seemed to defy natural acoustics. "It was like a flute being played by someone who didn't need to breathe," Sarah Jenkins later described. "The notes were sustained longer than should be possible, and they moved around us in a pattern that seemed deliberate." When Reed stepped out of her tent with a flashlight, she caught sight of a tall figure moving away from the camp toward the excavation site. She described it as impossibly tall and thin, moving with an unnatural fluidity that defied normal biomechanics. The limbs seemed too long, the proportions wrong, and it moved with a silent grace that was somehow more terrifying than any noise could have been. The figure disappeared into the darkness before she could get a clear look, but the encounter left the entire team shaken. The following day, while excavating a deeper layer of the site, the team uncovered a chamber that appeared to have been intentionally sealed. The entrance was covered with carefully fitted stone blocks that matched the surrounding rocks so perfectly that they would have remained undetected without ground-penetrating radar. It took nearly 6 hours of careful work to remove the blocking stones without damaging whatever lay behind them. Inside, they found a series of wall panels depicting what appeared to be a historical record of some kind. The panels, carved into the stone walls and filled with mineral pigments that had retained their color despite the passage of millennia, showed a narrative sequence that defied conventional understanding of ancient cultures in the region. The panels showed the arrival of tall, thin figures that interacted with the ancient inhabitants. Some panels depicted what appeared to be peaceful exchanges, with the tall figures offering objects to human figures who appeared to be reverencing them. Other panels showed conflict and abduction, with humans being taken away by the tall figures against their will. The artistic style was sophisticated, with perspective and anatomical detail that shouldn't have been possible for the time period. What was most disturbing was the consistency in how the tall figures were depicted. Always taller than humans by at least a head, always unnaturally thin, always with elongated limbs. The final panel showed the ancient inhabitants sealing the chamber, with the tall figures standing outside as if waiting. Daniel Kim, the tool technologies expert, noted that the carving tools required to create such detailed images would have needed to be made of materials harder than any known to exist in the region during that time period. That night, the expedition experienced its most terrifying encounter. At approximately 2 a.m., a storm moved into the area, bringing high winds and heavy snow. The team huddled in their tents as the wind howled around them, the temperature dropping rapidly as the front moved through. Around 3:30 a.m., the whistling sound returned, this time seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously. Reed later reported, "It felt as if we were surrounded. The sound was everywhere at once, moving in ways that defied the wind patterns. Sometimes it seemed to circle us, other times it appeared to come from directly above. The acoustics were impossible. Sounds that should have been masked by the wind came through with perfect clarity. Then came the tapping, light, rhythmic sounds on the tent fabric that seemed to form a deliberate pattern, almost like a form of communication. The storm subsided around dawn, and when the team emerged from their tents, they found that a section of the excavation had collapsed, completely burying the chamber they had discovered the previous day. The collapse appeared to be from natural causes, water infiltration combined with the freeze-thaw cycle, but the timing was unsettling. More disturbingly, several sets of unusual footprints were found in the newly fallen snow. Elongated impressions with a stride length that Reed estimated at nearly 7 feet. The tracks appeared to circle the campsite multiple times before leading away toward the ridge and disappearing. There were at least 3 different sets of tracks, Mark Harrison noted in his field notes, all with the same impossible stride length, all with the same distinctive shape, narrow, with what appeared to be only 3 or 4 toe impressions rather than the 5 you'd expect from a human foot. Reed made the decision to abandon the excavation, citing safety concerns and the approaching winter weather. "The chamber collapse convinced me that continuing would be irresponsible," she wrote in her official report. "With the road likely to become impassable within days and the structural integrity of the site compromised, I determined that the wisest course of action was to document what we could and retreat before we became stranded." Before leaving, she had her team photograph and document everything they could, working frantically to create a comprehensive record of what they had discovered. The team packed up their equipment and departed on January 18th, leaving the site as they had found it, with the exception of the carefully backfilled excavation units. Thomas Yazzie seemed relieved to be leaving, frequently glancing back at the ridgeline as they drove away. Reed submitted a detailed report to the university and to the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department, though she omitted some of the more inexplicable details, fearing they would undermine her credibility. I focused on what could be scientifically verified: the artifacts, the architectural features, the carbon dating results, she later explained in a private journal. I couldn't include the encounters with the tall figures or the strange nighttime incidents without risking my professional reputation. Even I struggled to accept what we had experienced, and I was there. The official report made no mention of the footprints, the whistling sounds, or the arranged artifacts. Only the chamber collapse, which was attributed to natural causes. The artifacts recovered from the site were taken to the University of New Mexico for analysis, where several researchers noted their unusual characteristics. The symbols on the pottery didn't match any known language, ancient or modern, despite being compared with databases of writing systems from around the world. The metallurgical analysis of the iron tools revealed properties that couldn't be explained by known forging techniques, with molecular structures suggesting temperatures and processes that shouldn't have been possible with ancient technology. Most puzzling were the petroglyphs depicting the tall figures, which bore an unsettling resemblance to figures described in recent sightings throughout the Navajo Nation, a connection Reed made only after learning about other incidents in the region. Reed never returned to the Chuska Mountains, though she continued to study the artifacts and photographs from the expedition until her retirement in 2005. In a series of private journals released after her death, she wrote, "I know what we found there challenges everything we believe about the ancient history of this continent. But more troubling is the possibility that whatever coexisted with those ancient inhabitants might still be there, waiting in the mountains. Sometimes I wake in the night thinking I hear that whistling sound, and I wonder if we disturbed something that should have remained undisturbed." The site has never been re-excavated and is now considered sacred by the local Navajo communities, who warn visitors away with signs that read simply, "Some places are not meant to be disturbed." The legacy of the Chuska Mountains expedition continues to influence archaeological research in the Southwest, though few in the academic community know the full story. The artifacts remain in a restricted collection at the University of New Mexico, available only to researchers with special clearance. The official report has been cited in numerous papers, though always with questions about the unusual artifacts and their implications for North American prehistory. In 2010, a team using satellite imaging detected what appeared to be additional structures in the area surrounding Reed's original site, but the Navajo Nation has denied all requests for further investigation, citing the sacred nature of the land. Whatever ancient secrets the Chuska Mountains hold, they remain protected by both natural barriers and cultural prohibitions, perhaps for the best, as those who spent that winter in 1988 investigating the site would surely agree. Highway 264 stretches across the Navajo Nation, connecting communities across the vast desert landscape like a ribbon of asphalt laid across an ancient canvas. This particular stretch of road, running between Ganado and Window Rock, has long been known among locals as a place where the veil between worlds grows thin, where travelers occasionally report strange phenomena that defy conventional explanation. The highway cuts through a landscape of red rock formations, sagebrush plains, and distant mesas that seem to change shape with the shifting light of day. On February 22, 1988, this stretch of road would become the site of one of the most baffling encounters in the region's history, an incident that would be documented in meticulous detail, yet remain unexplained to this day. The winter of 1987-1988 had already seen numerous unusual sightings throughout the Navajo Nation, but what occurred on that February evening would provide the most comprehensive eyewitness account of the phenomenon that had been troubling the region. Robert and Linda Martinez, both retired teachers from Fresno, California, had embarked on what they described as their dream retirement trip, a 3-month journey across the American Southwest in their newly purchased Winnebago RV. The couple, both in their early 60s, had spent their careers teaching history and literature, respectively, and had long been fascinated by Native American cultures and the unique landscapes of the Southwest. Their trip had taken them through Monument Valley, Canyon de Chelly, and numerous other historic sites, with Robert keeping a detailed journal and Linda documenting their journey with her 35mm camera. On February 22nd, they had spent the day exploring the backroads of northern Arizona, following a scenic route recommended by a park ranger at the Hubble Trading Post National Historic Site. As dusk began to settle over the landscape, they were making their way east toward Window Rock, where they had reservations at a local hotel for the next 3 nights. The couple had spent the day exploring the scenic byways of northern Arizona and were heading back to their hotel in Window Rock as dusk settled over the landscape. The weather was unseasonably mild, with temperatures in the mid-50s and a clear sky that promised a spectacular sunset. Traffic was light on the 2-lane highway, with only an occasional pickup truck passing them in the opposite direction. Linda had been navigating while Robert drove, consulting the detailed maps they had purchased at a visitor center in Ganado. The landscape around them was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. As they drove through a particularly isolated stretch approximately 15 miles west of the community of Ganado, Linda noticed a figure standing beside the road ahead. At first, she assumed it was a rancher or hitchhiker, but something about the figure's stillness struck her as unusual. As they drew closer, they could see that the figure was unusually tall and thin, standing perfectly still beside a fence post that marked the boundary of what appeared to be grazing land. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, Linda would later tell investigators. Too tall to be a person, and too still. It was just waiting. Robert, who had been driving at approximately 55 miles per hour, slowed their RV as they approached, concerned that someone might need assistance. As they drew within 100 yards, both could see that the figure's proportions were wrong. Its limbs seemed elongated, its height well above that of any human they had ever seen. The figure stood motionless, facing away from them, appearing to gaze across the desert toward the distant ridgeline. Robert pulled over approximately 50 yards past the figure, intending to offer help, though a sense of unease had begun to settle over both of them. Robert pulled over approximately 50 yards past the figure, intending to offer help. As he got out of the RV and walked back toward the figure, he noticed several unsettling details. The figure appeared to be dressed in some kind of dark, flowing garment, though the fabric seemed to shift and change in the fading light, almost as if it were not made of conventional material. The desert around them had grown quiet, with no sound of wind or birds, only the distant hum of the RV's engine. Robert would later describe the air as feeling heavy, like before a storm, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. As he approached within 30 yards, he called out, asking if the person needed assistance, but received no response. The figure remained perfectly still, its back to him, its height becoming even more apparent as he drew closer. Robert estimated it to be at least 8 feet tall, perhaps taller. When Robert was approximately 20 feet away, the figure turned its head toward him. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. It didn't have a face, he stated in his official statement to Navajo Nation police. Just a smooth surface that reflected the sunset in a way that seemed wrong, like a funhouse mirror. The reflection was distorted, showing the sky and the desert behind me, but not me. It was as if I wasn't there. The figure's head turned with an unnatural smoothness, no apparent joints or muscular movement, and its neck seemed longer than a human's. Robert froze, his heart pounding, as the figure raised one arm, pointing with a long, slender finger toward the distant ridgeline. Robert followed the gesture and saw several similar figures standing on the ridge, all impossibly tall and thin against the darkening sky, their dark forms silhouetted against the last vestiges of sunlight. Frightened, Robert backed away slowly, not turning his back on the figure until he had retreated to the RV. Linda, who had been watching from the passenger window, described the scene. Robert was walking backward, his face pale with shock. The figure never moved, just kept pointing toward the ridge. When Robert got back in the RV, I looked and saw them, at least 5 of those tall figures on the ridge, all standing perfectly still, all watching us. As they drove away, they could see the figures in their rearview mirror, all now standing in a line along the ridgeline, watching them depart. The experience lasted less than 5 minutes, but left both deeply shaken. Robert's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, and Linda found herself unable to speak, merely staring at the receding figures in the side mirror. They continued to Window Rock, where they reported the incident to Navajo Nation Police. Officer David Lee took their statement at approximately 7:30 p.m., noting the couple's genuine distress and the consistency of their accounts. Lee, who had been with the force for 12 years, had taken several other reports involving similar descriptions in recent months, though none as detailed as this one. "I've lived in this area my whole life," Lee would later comment in an internal memo. "I've heard the old stories about what walks the desert at night, but I never thought I'd be taking a police report about it. Yet these people, they weren't crazy. They were educated, sensible people who had seen something they couldn't explain." Noting the consistency with other recent reports, Lee dispatched a patrol car to investigate the area where the Martinez couple had their encounter. The responding officers found no evidence of anyone having been at the location described by the Martinez couple. The ground was too rocky to retain footprints, and no other vehicles had been reported in the area. The fence post beside which the figure had stood appeared normal, with no unusual markings or disturbances. What they did notice was that several of the fence posts along that stretch of highway bore strange symbols that appeared to have been recently carved. When photographed, these symbols matched those found at other incident sites throughout the Navajo Nation, including the trading post where Officer Begay had his encounter and the archaeological site in the Chusca Mountains. The officers also noted that the area was known among locals as a place where strange occurrences had been reported for generations, though most modern residents dismissed such stories as folklore. The Martinez case is significant not just for the detailed description it provided, but for what happened in the following days. After returning to California, Robert developed a series of photographs he had taken during their trip. One image, taken from the RV as they drove away from the figures, showed the tall silhouettes against the sunset. What was disturbing was that the figures appeared to be emitting some kind of energy or light that was visible to the camera, but not to the naked eye. "I didn't see any light or aura around them," Linda would later tell investigators. "They were just dark shapes against the sky." But when Robert developed the photos, there was this strange glow around them, almost like heat rising from pavement, but in a pattern that didn't make sense. When the photograph was analyzed by experts at the University of California, they could not explain the phenomenon, though some suggested it might be some kind of atmospheric anomaly or lens flare. In the weeks following their encounter, both Robert and Linda experienced unusual phenomena that they attributed to their Highway 264 experience. Linda reported waking in the night to find small piles of smooth stones arranged on their bedroom floor, similar to those described in other incident reports. "At first, I thought I was dreaming," she wrote in a follow-up statement to investigators. "But then I started finding them during the day too. Little piles of stones, always the same number, 7, always smooth river stones, though we live nowhere near a river." Robert began experiencing what he described as episodes of missing time, where he would find himself in different rooms of their home with no memory of how he got there. These experiences continued for several months before gradually subsiding, though both remained convinced that their encounter on Highway 264 had somehow changed them. The police report on the incident remains in the Navajo Nation Police Archives, designated Case File 88-264-0222. The photograph taken by Robert Martinez has been examined by numerous experts over the years, with no consensus ever reached on what it depicts. Photographic analysts have ruled out equipment malfunction or deliberate manipulation, while physicists have been unable to explain the nature of the energy field that appears to surround the figures. The case has been referenced in several paranormal research papers and was featured in a 1995 documentary about unexplained phenomena in the American Southwest. Highway 264 continues to be the site of occasional sightings, though none have been as detailed or well documented as the Martinez encounter. The couple never returned to the Navajo Nation, though they maintained contact with investigators for several years, hoping that someone might eventually provide an explanation for what they experienced that February evening. Robert Martinez passed away in 2003, Linda in 2007, but before their deaths, they granted an interview to a researcher specializing in unexplained phenomena. "We were sensible people," Linda explained in that interview, "teachers with degrees in history and literature. We didn't believe in things that couldn't be explained, but what we saw that evening defied everything we thought we knew about the world. It wasn't frightening in a horror movie way. It was frightening in a the world isn't what you think it is way. That's much harder to process." Robert added, "I've spent years trying to find a rational explanation, but there isn't one. Those things weren't human. They weren't from anywhere I could recognize. And the most unsettling part, they knew we were there. They were waiting for us." No such explanation has ever been offered for what the Martinez couple experienced on that stretch of Highway 264. The case remains one of the most thoroughly documented yet perplexing incidents in the history of unexplained phenomena in the American Southwest. The photograph continues to defy analysis. The symbols on the fence posts remain unidentified, and the connection to other incidents throughout the Navajo Nation remains unexplained. What is certain is that something happened to Robert and Linda Martinez on that February evening, something that would change their perception of reality forever and leave them with questions that would remain unanswered for the rest of their lives. The desert landscape holds many secrets, and Highway 264 continues to guard whatever walks along its edges when the sun goes down. As reports of strange encounters continued throughout the Navajo Nation in early 1988, one man decided it was time to speak out. Thomas Nez, a respected medicine man from the community of Crown Point, had been following the incidents with growing concern. In March 1988, he requested a meeting with tribal elders and law enforcement officials to share what he knew about the phenomenon that had been troubling the region. What he revealed would connect the recent incidents to ancient stories and warnings that had been passed down through generations of Navajo healers. Nez had spent his entire life learning the traditional ways of his people, studying under his grandfather and other elders who carried knowledge that stretched back centuries. He had witnessed strange phenomena himself as a young man, though he had rarely spoken of these experiences outside his family. The disappearances and encounters of late 1987 and early 1988 had convinced him that silence was no longer an option. The meeting took place on March 15, 1988. In the tribal council chambers in Window Rock. The room, typically used for governmental proceedings, felt different that day, more like a ceremonial space than a political one. Nez had requested that specific arrangements be made, including the placement of a small woven rug in the center of the room and the burning of sage before the meeting began. Present were 5 tribal elders, including Council President Peterson Za, 3 representatives from the Navajo Nation Police Department, and 2 FBI agents who had been assisting with the investigation of the recent disappearances. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with anticipation as Nez entered, dressed not in his usual Western-style clothing, but in traditional attire that marked him as a person of spiritual authority within his community. He carried with him a leather pouch containing sacred objects and several rolled pieces of what appeared to be aged parchment or hide. Nez began by acknowledging that what he was about to share would be difficult for some to accept, but he felt compelled to speak, given the gravity of the situation. He spoke first in Navajo, then in English, explaining that some concepts could not be directly translated, but must be understood in their original cultural context. He then proceeded to tell a story that had been passed down in his family for generations, a story that had never been written down, but existed only in the oral tradition of his lineage. As he spoke, the room grew silent, with even the skeptical FBI agents leaning forward to catch every word. Nez's voice carried the weight of generations, and his manner suggested that he was not merely sharing folklore but revealing truths that had been carefully guarded for centuries. According to Nez, the tall, thin figures that had been sighted throughout the region were known in his family's oral tradition as the Watchers, or the Tall Ones. They were not skinwalkers or other shapeshifters commonly spoken of in Navajo folklore, but something else entirely. Beings that existed between worlds and could cross over during specific astronomical alignments. Nez explained that these beings had been encountered by his ancestors at various points throughout history, always during periods of celestial significance, and always associated with disappearances and strange phenomena. He described how his great-grandfather had documented such encounters in the late 19th century, carving symbols into canyon walls that marked the locations where these beings had appeared. These symbols, Nez revealed, matched those found at several of the recent incident sites, suggesting a continuity of encounters spanning more than a century. These beings do not belong to our world or to the spirit world as we understand it, Nez explained through a translator, though his English was clear and precise. They come from somewhere else, drawn here when the veil between worlds grows thin. They are observers by nature, but sometimes they take what they observe. They are drawn to certain places, places where the earth is thin, where our world touches others. The places where the recent incidents have occurred, Canyon de Chelly, Monument Valley, the Chuska Mountains, these are all such places. Nez went on to explain that these locations had long been considered sacred or dangerous by his people, not because of any evil associated with them, but because they were thresholds, places where the boundaries between different realities were more permeable than elsewhere. He described how his ancestors had learned to recognize these places and to approach them with caution, especially during certain times of the year when celestial alignments created conditions favorable for crossover events. Nez went on to explain that his grandfather had encountered similar beings during his youth in the 1920s and had passed down specific warnings about how to respond to such encounters. "You must not engage with them," Nez emphasized, his voice growing more intense. "You must not draw their attention or show fear. Most importantly, you must not accept anything they offer or leave anything of yours behind, for they can use these things to find you." He recounted a story his grandfather had told him about a hunter who had encountered one of the tall ones near Canyon de Chelly in 1923. The hunter, against the warnings of his elders, had approached the being and offered a piece of his hunting gear as a sign of peace. Within a week, the hunter had vanished, leaving behind only tracks that led to the canyon wall, and then disappeared. When asked why the beings were appearing now after so many years, Nez pointed to celestial alignments that occurred in late 1987 and would continue through early 1988, creating what he described as a thinning of the veil between worlds. The officials present at the meeting listened respectfully, though some clearly struggled with what they were hearing. FBI agent Michael Richardson, who had been skeptical of supernatural explanations for the incidents, asked Nez if he had any practical advice for law enforcement dealing with these phenomena. Richardson had previously attributed the disappearances to more conventional explanations, such as wild animal attacks or criminal activity, but the lack of evidence supporting these theories had left him frustrated. Nez thought for a moment before responding. "Protect the communities," he said, "but do not confront these beings directly. They are not evil in the way we understand evil. But they are not human either. They operate by rules we do not understand. The best protection is knowledge of the old ways, certain ceremonies and symbols that can create barriers they will not cross." Nez then explained that these protective measures were not about repelling evil, but about creating boundaries that the beings would recognize and respect, much as humans respect property lines or territorial markers. Following the meeting, Nez provided the officials with drawings of several protective symbols that he claimed could deter the beings. These symbols matched those found at various incident sites throughout the Navajo Nation, suggesting that others had knowledge of these protective measures. Nez explained that these symbols were not magical in the conventional sense, but operated according to principles similar to how certain frequencies can disrupt electronic signals. They created a kind of interference that made it uncomfortable or difficult for the beings to remain in the area. He also identified specific dates when the celestial alignments would be strongest, warning that the phenomena might increase during these times. The final such date, he noted, would be the spring equinox on March 20, 1988, after which the alignments would begin to weaken and the incidents would likely subside naturally. In the days following the meeting, several communities implemented Nez's recommendations, placing the protective symbols around schools, medical facilities, and other public buildings. The implementation varied from community to community. Some painted the symbols on walls, others carved them into wooden posts that were then placed at strategic locations, and still others wove the symbols into tapestries that were hung in community centers. The Navajo Nation Police Department distributed drawings of the symbols to all officers, with instructions to avoid direct confrontation with any sightings and to report them immediately. Whether by coincidence or effectiveness, there was a notable decrease in reported sightings after March 20, 1988. The incidents did not stop entirely. There would continue to be occasional sightings in the years that followed. But the wave of phenomena that had begun in late 1987 appeared to subside with the passing of the celestial alignments. Thomas Nez passed away in 2004, taking with him much of the knowledge he had shared about the Tall Ones. In the years following the 1988 meeting, he had continued to serve his community as a medicine man, but he rarely spoke publicly about the Tall Ones, preferring to share that knowledge only with those who came to him seeking help for strange encounters. In an interview shortly before his death, he reflected on the events of 1987 to 1988. We live in a world with many mysteries, some of which we are not meant to solve. The Tall Ones are one such mystery. They come and they go according to patterns older than our understanding. All we can do is respect their presence, protect our communities, and wait for them to pass. The earth remembers everything, even when we forget. The meeting transcript remains in the Navajo Nation archives, a rare official acknowledgement of the traditional knowledge that helped explain the unexplainable events of that strange winter. The legacy of Nez's revelations continues to influence how the Navajo Nation responds to unusual phenomena. In the years since 1988, there have been periodic increases in sightings that correspond to the celestial alignments Nez identified, though none have reached the intensity of the 1987-1988 wave. Each time, communities have quietly implemented the protective measures Nez recommended, with what appears to be success. The FBI, initially skeptical of Nez's explanations, has since incorporated aspects of his approach into their protocols for unexplained phenomena, particularly the emphasis on avoiding direct confrontation and establishing protective boundaries rather than attempting to capture or engage with unknown entities. What began as a crisis in 1987 has evolved into a new understanding of how traditional knowledge and modern law enforcement might work together to address phenomena that defy conventional explanation. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly across the Navajo Nation where ancient traditions intersect with modern mysteries. The events that began in late 1987 and continued through early 1988 represent one of the most concentrated series of unexplained phenomena in recent American history. 8 separate incidents spanning multiple communities and involving dozens of witnesses, all connected by descriptions of tall, thin figures and the unsettling phenomena that accompanied their appearances. What makes these accounts particularly compelling is not just their number, but their consistency. Details that emerged independently across different locations and from witnesses who had no prior knowledge of one another's experiences. The official investigations into these incidents have yielded few concrete answers. The Navajo Nation Police Department maintains open files on each case, though none have seen active investigation in many years. The FBI, which assisted with several of the disappearance cases, officially categorized the incidents as unexplained phenomena and closed their involvement in 1990. What remains are police reports, witness statements, photographs, and artifacts that tell a story without resolution, a pattern of encounters that defies conventional explanation, yet persists in the memories of those who experienced them. Perhaps most intriguing is how these incidents bridge the gap between traditional Navajo knowledge and modern investigative techniques. The symbols and warnings provided by medicine man Thomas Nez aligned with physical evidence found at various sites, suggesting that the oral traditions of the Navajo people contained knowledge that modern science could not explain. The protective measures Nez recommended appeared to coincide with a decrease in phenomena, though whether this represents causation or coincidence remains a matter of debate. What is clear is that the ancient stories of the Navajo people contain references to beings and phenomena that bear striking resemblance to what witnesses reported in 1987-1988. The psychological impact on those who experienced these phenomena cannot be overstated. Nearly every witness described lasting changes to their perception of reality and their place in the world. Some, like Officer Albert Begay, altered their life paths completely, changing careers or relocating to different regions. Others, like the Martinez couple, continued to experience unexplained phenomena long after their initial encounters. Even those who investigated the incidents, such as Ranger Joseph Chi and Dr. Eleanor Reed, spoke of how their experiences had fundamentally changed their understanding of what is possible in our world. Time has not brought clarity to these mysteries. If anything, the passage of decades has only deepened the questions. The artifacts recovered from the Chuska Mountains excavation continue to puzzle researchers, with some suggesting they represent evidence of contact between ancient inhabitants and non-human intelligences. The photographs taken by Robert Martinez on Highway 264 have been analyzed with increasingly sophisticated technology, yet they remain unexplained. The recordings from the KNIA-FM transmission have been studied by linguists and acoustic experts who can identify no known source for the sounds they contain. What we are left with is a series of documented encounters that challenge our understanding of reality. They suggest that our world may intersect with others in ways we cannot yet comprehend, that there may be beings or forces that operate according to principles we have yet to discover. The Navajo people have long understood this possibility, incorporating it into their traditional knowledge and oral histories. For those of us grounded in Western scientific paradigms, these incidents represent a humbling reminder of how much we have yet to learn about the world we inhabit. The landscape of the Navajo Nation continues to hold its secrets. The canyons, mesas, and mountains that witnessed these events remain largely unchanged, continuing to exist as they have for millennia. Visitors still travel to these places, drawn by their beauty and mystery, though most remain unaware of what occurred there in the winter of 1987-1988. Occasionally, reports still emerge of tall figures seen at dusk, of strange sounds in the night, of unusual phenomena that defy explanation. The pattern established in 1987 has not been repeated with the same intensity, but it has not entirely disappeared either. Perhaps the most appropriate response to these mysteries is not to seek definitive answers, but to acknowledge the limits of our understanding. The Navajo approach to such phenomena, one of respect, caution, and acceptance of mystery, offers a model for how we might respond to the unexplained. Not everything needs to be categorized, explained, or understood. Some things exist beyond the boundaries of our current knowledge, waiting patiently for us to expand our understanding of what is possible. The American Southwest, with its vast landscapes and ancient cultures, continues to be a place where the veil between worlds seems thin, where the ordinary and extraordinary intersect. The events of 1987 to 1988 remind us that our world is stranger and more complex than we often acknowledge, that there are phenomena that operate according to rules we have yet to discover. In the end, perhaps the most honest response to such mysteries is not to solve them, but to sit with them, to acknowledge their existence without fully comprehending their nature, to respect what we do not understand. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. Our understanding of these phenomena grows with each account,